समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
Pictures of burning cars, lots of debris lying on the streets, lots of police in riot gear, and not just normal riot gear of the kind that you might imagine, but also heavily armed. If you see all of that and some angry people, it makes for really impressive pictures. However, if I look at the overall situation in Los Angeles on the street, or in terms of what has actually happened, I might think that it's a bit underwhelming. So why are we dedicating a full episode of Cut the Clutter to it? That's because what's important is not what's happened on the ground. On the ground, I would say I've seen more intense riots in our country, or more intense protests in our country, even in the city, New Delhi, over such vital issues, such vital bread and butter issues like the price of bus passes, DTC, Delhi Transport Corporation, bus passes going up, right? A few buses are burned, some police station is attacked. Lots of tamashas take place of this type all over the country. We saw the post-Shaheen Bagh riots in Delhi. We've seen riots elsewhere. We saw Murshidabad. There are very big riots and a lot of violence. So we are inured to much more than what LA has seen. LA, in fact, has hardly seen any injury. Fingers crossed, has not seen any deaths. It has not even seen protesters out in thousands. If at all, they are out in hundreds. In one place, from whatever I am reading, it's about 400 to 500 people. That's it. However, what this has done is, and what is important, and the reason we are talking about this is, this has reminded us of a fact that all democracies, particularly large countries that are democracies, large diverse countries, diverse in many ways, they all have an issue called federalism. And federalism also leads to the balance between the central government, as we say in India, or federal government, as they say in the US, and the states or the provinces, because the powers between the two are divided. And as in most classical, decent, democratic states, law and order is very much a state subject, as it is in India. Now, because law and order is a state subject, then federal governments then create agencies, create laws to give themselves powers. They give themselves powers, one, to deal with crimes that they think states may not be capable of dealing with because it needs more expertise, or crimes that go across states. That's why we have the CBI. And then to that list was also added terrorism. So terrorism again is a crime that can take place across states. The same gang of criminals, the same terrorist gang can be operating across states, also overseas. So NIA was set up, and similarly crime of money laundering, that's why Enforcement Directorate with special laws was set up, and similarly for drugs. Similarly in America, there are the feds or the FBI, and there are also the Drug Enforcement Authority and other such agencies. What happens, however, is when there are riots, in India, when there are riots, law and order breaks down. Now, the test of when the central government can move in directly is very high. The test of our constitution is you can use Article 355, doesn't have to be invoked, you can use Article 355 to send support to the state, because central government has the responsibility to protect every state or citizens in every state of the country. That's the kind of power central government used to send its forces into Manipur while the BJP's government was in power. Then second is a much higher test, which is Article 356 of the Constitution, under which President of India, on advice from the Union Cabinet, can dismiss a state government, but then the test has to be an irretrievable breakdown of constitutional order. That is very difficult to establish. After the Boumai judgment, that's rarely done. And every government, every central government is afraid of doing it because nobody wants to lose a court than lose a challenge in the court. Now, if in India the test is so high, you can imagine how it is in America, where the states have their own flags, where the states have a lot of autonomy, right? Where the states have different laws in many areas, even divorce laws, abortion laws vary from state to state. America is actually the ultimate federal nation. It is the ultimate federal union. It's a federation where the states' powers are very well defined, and also a lot of the states are governed by the party not in power, or the party from which the president of the US doesn't come. US is a complex system. Even federally, it has a Senate and Congress where the president's party may not have a majority, and even if it does have a majority, people can vote across party lines. It's a complex system made further complicated by the rise of Donald Trump, because all of these norms are now set. Donald Trump is impatient with these norms, and he is putting his impatience to test in the state of California, which in a way is his favorite state because it's a very large state. It makes a large contribution to the electoral college for president. It never votes in the Republican candidates. So New York, Chicago, LA, San Francisco, these big cities, Boston, all of the big cities vote Democrat, and that's a big pain point with Donald Trump. Also, the states to which these cities belong, that's California, Illinois, Massachusetts, New York, all of these states, Democrats always win. These are blue states, and Donald Trump doesn't like that. So what's happened in this case? Let's try and understand. What happened on Friday was the action started on Friday. So agents of ICE department, that is immigration and customs enforcement, they went to investigate some places. You can say they went on raids to some places in a clothing store called Ambiance clothing store in a downtown area of Los Angeles. So they went there and they picked up some people as suspected illegal aliens. That is Donald Trump's Dharmyudh, jihad, whatever you want to call it, crusade, call it what you want, but he is running on a single point agenda of getting rid of illegal immigrants, aliens, who he says are all criminals. Jails in so many countries have emptied out because convicts have been sent to America, child rapists have been sent to America, kidnappers, drug dealers have been sent to America, etc., etc. That's how these raids were carried out, and some people were picked up for further inquiry. As that happened, some protests built up there. Wasn't a huge protest, just about 50 to 100 people. This is also outside a big store. America has this series of stores, a chain of stores called home stores. Each one is about 100,000 square feet. You can buy anything you need to build a home, whether you want to build it yourself or you're getting it built. This also happened near a home store, and word also spread rumors that the home store was also being raided. However, that was not the case. Now, this happened when these suspects were taken to the federal agency's office, which has a detention facility in LA. Then about 100 people gathered in protest outside that detention facility. Then they defaced some of the cars. They try to take pictures or make videos of the federal agents who were questioning and or picking up these people, which means in a way, to make it much shorter, in a way doxing them. That was used as an excuse. That was used as an excuse for Donald Trump to say that this is a breakdown, this is an insurrection, and I'm calling in the National Guard. Now, what is the National Guard? We'll talk about in just a minute, because from Friday, we now move to Saturday. Friday, things have gone bad in one particular area. On Saturday, again outside a Home Depot, in downtown Los Angeles, more protests took place, similarly because raids were being carried out, and a bunch of cars were burned. These are some of the pictures you've seen. Some of these cars that were burned belong to Waymo, a driverless rental car company. These cars were burnt and these made these stark pictures, and that then spread also to an industrial park in an LA neighborhood of Paramount. Now that spread to the industrial park where protesters now were in larger numbers. They were about 350 to 400 people. By this time, about 100 people had been detained on suspicion of being illegal immigrants. Now, this is a very sensitive issue and very politicized issue and a very polarizing issue in Los Angeles because it is 1/3 immigrant. And a lot of the immigrants, in fact, a large number are, where would you expect them to come from? They come from the South of America. They come from Mexico, El Salvador, etc. So many of the protesters were carrying mixed Mexican and American flags. Some were carrying Mexican flag, some were carrying El Salvadoran flags. So this was then painted as a foreign invasion of America as well, which Donald Trump had to send his federal troops to fight. This protest was ugly, but once again, no lives were lost. This protest was ugly. These protesters slashed tires, they defaced federal agents' cars and federal buildings as well. The police responded. They responded with tear gas and using something that is not something that we hear about very much, so much so that I had to Google it. That is stun grenades, which the American police calls flashbangs. So what do flashbangs do? They literally give you a flashbang. You means whoever they are aimed at. So they are thrown. They create a lot of light and sound, sound which can stun people. It does not cause a concussion, but for a few seconds it can cause a concussion-like feeling. Also, in some cases, the police use rubber bullets. You might have seen that one video of a TV reporter who's reporting from the street, who while she's live on camera is hit by a rubber bullet and looks like it's been fired directly at her. That's at least the allegation that it was done to provoke more protests. Nevertheless, this was the situation in which then all of Trump's people rose. Trump himself issued orders asking for National Guard to be brought in. And Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, who absolutely rejected it, he said, you don't have the power to do so, because in my state, in any state, the National Guard has to work under the authority of the governor of the state. You know, since we're talking law and order, protest, use of heavy-handed methods, I will tell you a fascinating story which will give you an insight into Indian politics as well, but towards the end of this episode, so do stay with me. Now, what is the National Guard? It's a bit of an American innovation. It's a bit of an American innovation. If I were to describe it, because it has multiple roles, it basically is not a full-time thing. First of all, it consists of people who have other normal civilian jobs, but who have also enrolled for National Guard. There is a National Army Guard, there is an Air Guard. So they are available in civilian distress. For example, during COVID, 80,000 of them were called. They are called during calamities, for example, Hurricane Katrina. They are also called in when there is a military challenge overseas, like wars overseas, Afghanistan, Iraq. So they are called in. So in a way, if you see the three functions, they are called in for domestic law and order issues as well when a state government is not able to handle things. 1992, for example, California, since we're talking about California, it's a good example. Pete Wilson, who was then the governor of California, and as you would expect, very liberal, left of center, he had requested Senior George Bush's government, Senior George Bush, the president then, to send in the National Guard to bring about to control law and order in LA as protests broke out with the acquittal of 4 white police officers who on camera and supposedly in full public view had beaten up one black person, Rodney King, and that's why protests took place. And the National Guard came in, but this was at the request of the governor of California. And then as this comes in, this works under the authority of the governor. This is not very different from the Indian situation where a state might have a big law and order problem, but if the state has an elected chief minister, then any central forces sent there have to function under the authority of the state government and the chief minister. So these are forces put at the disposal of the chief minister. That's been the practice in the US as well. If you look at National Guard, once again, I'm trying to find an easier way of explaining what it does. So it's a bit like the CRPF for internal law and order control, like the strong arm, or a force that's available federally for any part of the country which might need more police force than it already has, which needs reinforcements. So the federal government can make it available. So it has the role of the CRPF. It has the role of the territorial army, as we have in India, which is people who have other jobs but who also enroll in territorial army. See Manvendra Singh, our columnist, for example, Mahendra Singh Dhoni, Sachin Pilot, also Anurag Thakur, many of the others. These are people who enroll in territorial army, who also are then called up. One, they are called up every year for some time to be with their units, and in case of emergencies, if a war breaks out, then they go and their units become organized military units like regular military units. So this has the function of the CRPF, territorial army, and also the National Disaster Response Force, or NDRF. So this is all of these three forces into one. This is not a small entity. This is 4.5 lakh people, 4.5 lakh people over a population of say 33 crores, right? If you multiply it by 4, it comes to about 2 million people. That is much more than the strength of all of India's paramilitary forces, central armed police forces, plus territorial army. So this is something that the federal government has at its disposal. However, the power of the president to suo moto send this to the states and to empower it to act are very limited and rarely used. So I will take you back to some really ancient laws in America. There is an 1878 law called Posse Comitatus Act. I hope I pronounce it right. Posse Comitatus Act, that forbids the federal government or forbids the president from using any powers to suo moto send the National Guard to any of the states. That forbids them. However, there is a law from 1807, even older law of 1807, called the Insurrection Act, which says if the president declares that there is an insurrection against United States of America, then these powers are available to the president. So Trump had thought of doing this. He had talked about doing this even when the riots post the killing of George Floyd took place, starting in Minnesota, they reached Washington, D.C., but he never did it. Even now, he talked about this, his people talked about this, but they haven't done it. What they've done, on the other hand, is they've used a sideways law. A sideways law, which is difficult for me to describe. Suffice it to say that it's section 12406 of Title 10 of US Code, which means if there is a rebellion, if there is trouble which seems out of control, then the president can send the National Guard. However, it doesn't say that the National Guard will not be under the control of the governor. That's what the governor is contesting with Trump. And governor says that if this continues, I'm going to court. Then the state of California will sue the White House. That fight is going on. However, since we mentioned the 1807 Insurrection Act, we also have to understand that for Trump, it doesn't matter how old a law is. He will find out any old law. He will discover any old law if he can use it to serve his own purpose. Mostly it's a political purpose. So to deport some quote-unquote illegal aliens, like that infamous case where he sent somebody who had court protection to El Salvador, to one of El Salvador's really awful prisons. There he invoked a law which goes back to 1798. 1798 Alien Enemies Act. That act was enacted or passed because the US then was facing an invasion by the army and navy of revolutionary France. So he even used that law to deport somebody. That person, by the way, is now back in the US. So at one level, the rule of law works. The orders of the courts do get followed. So he's now back in the US. He's back from El Salvador. Of course, the US is charging him under multiple crimes. That said, if you want to search for a precedent of the president using this power suo motu or on his own, then I will take you to two more events in history. First, I'll take you really back, 1871, President Ulysses Grant, he used these powers to impose martial law in two counties of South Carolina. Why? To control the Ku Klux Klan. Why? Because they were interfering with voting. So that was 1871. 1965, Lyndon B. Johnson as president used these laws to send the National Guard to Alabama. That was to protect the civil rights protesters because Alabama was under Governor George Wallace. Governor George Wallace was among the last of the prominent segregationists in American politics. So the president sent the National Guard. Otherwise, we don't see any other instance. However, while Trump has been saying all this, see how his people are talking. Pete Hegseth, his Secretary of Defense, because he was given an executive order that you can use any troops from anywhere to put down this insurrection or whatever they called it, or this assault on the state. He said that he's willing to employ the Marines, and these would be Marines based in Camp Pendleton, which is in California. Again, Governor Newsom said that this is an outrage, the idea to think that you can use US Marines on US's own territory against US's people. Then some of the others, some who are even more right-wing, who are even more right-wing, even on the MAGA side. That is Stephen Miller, who's Deputy Chief of Staff at the White House, who's called it a fight to save the civilization. And he said mass migration is the biggest threat to America, and if you don't fix it, you can't save the nation. So this has gone now to that ideological level. Now, why is this happening? I read an article in Atlantic. It's a bit of a conspiracy theory, but you know, there are conspiracy theories and conspiracy theories and conspiracy theories. So one side says that America is faced with this mass invasion of aliens who are taking over our country. The argument on this side is that Trump is doing this, that he's doing many illegal or corrupt things. I mean, if you have any doubts about that, see the dealings that his family now has with the Pakistanis and others over, or some Gulf states or Gulf sheikhs over cryptocurrencies. So that is something that we are very familiar with. Given that he's walking the fine line between law and illegality, right, and he's doing many irregular things, the real threat will come to him if in the midterm elections next year, which is November 2026, if he loses majority on the Hill. That's why his idea is right now to use federal powers to create made-for-TV disturbances in cities and states that don't vote for him. Second, invoke emergency federal powers to carry out a takeover of these places, and then seize control until the voting. So police action now until the voting in November 26. It's a long shot. It will take a long time. But remember, when the George Floyd issue came up, there were two sides to the argument. On one side was defund the police. That was one extreme. That just to have the police means citizens have no rights, so defund the police. We don't need the police. That was anarchist in its own way. On the other side, Trump's side, it was law and order. Everything is at law and order. That's when Senator Tom Cotton wrote that famous or infamous op-ed in the New York Times saying that it wasn't a bad idea to call in the army when situation was out of control, right? It was because of that op-ed that the op-ed page editor, his deputy, some others in the New York Times were turfed out because there was a protest from the New York Times staff, because a lot of the people on the staff said that we feel insecure, we feel scared, reading such articles in our papers. So that issue had polarized America so much. He's looking for that polarization again because that polarization is what brought him to power. We've had Tom Friedman write this, and Tom Friedman is by no means a Trump supporter. He wrote that the three stupidest words spoken in American debate were defund the police, because everybody at the end of the day likes law and order. Now, Governor Gavin Newsom of California, he is somebody, he is not particularly Trump's favorite, because he is also somebody who's finished his term, final term as governor. He cannot contest again, but he sees himself as a likely Democratic candidate for the 2028 presidential election. Also, he is quite popular in his own state. California will never vote for Trump, or so Trump thinks, although they got more votes this time than in the past. Trump, in fact, has been attacking him from day one. If you see any of Trump's tweets, he never calls him Governor Gavin Newsom. He calls him Governor Gavin Newscum, N-E-W-S-C-U-M, scum, right? Only in America can a president address a governor like that. Can you imagine in India a prime minister using that kind of a language about a chief minister of another party? So for Trump, even the normal courtesies don't matter. He's changed the rules of the game. And that's also the reason why this becomes a fight that is political, ideological, but also personal. That said, I promised to tell you a story about this. I haven't forgotten, so I will tell you now. So early 1989, that was around time Bhutta Singh, who was then our home minister, he was under a lot of controversy. There were some scams or alleged scams involving his sons. There were many other issues, some other big deals. His deputy had been Arun Nehru, who he did not get along, and Arun Nehru meanwhile had also broken off and gone against Rajiv Gandhi. It was a messy situation. I was, along with Pankaj Pachauri, who you might be familiar with, we were writing a story on him, investigating him. So as we kept on working on the story and I asked him for time, he said, why don't you and your editor, Arun Puri, come and have dinner with me? So Arun Puri and I went to have dinner with him at Bhutta Singh's home. His sons were also in attendance. His sons, I sort of vaguely remember their nicknames. I think they were Bunty or Lovely. I think Bunty and Lovely. Young boys, they were there. Now we talked about many things, and Bhutta Singh gave us his story and also tried to clear his name. But all of that is not relevant today. What's relevant today is something that he told us about management of riots. He said that Edward Shevardnadze was then foreign minister of the Soviet Union. Soviet Union was a bit shaky then. He was also the strongman of Georgia. So he was like the secretary or the head of the Georgian unit of the Communist Party, which means basically like the governor come chief minister come whatever of Georgia for a long time. He was a Georgian strongman. That Shevardnadze had come to Delhi on a visit, and Rajiv Gandhi asked Bhutta Singh to host him for a dinner, for a meal. Now I will give you a little background to this. This is when the first big protests, first big insurrection or secessionist movement had broken out in one of the republics of the Soviet Union, and that republic was Georgia. And that's when the riots had taken place in Tbilisi, and because the Soviet Union only had KGB troops, they came out with tanks. They didn't know what to do with this few tens of thousands of protesters, maybe some rioters. So they used heavy ammunition against them, including poison gas and nerve gas. And that became a global scandal and global outrage. That was the background. I just told Shevardnadze, मैंने सुना है आपके यहाँ बहुत प्रॉब्लम हुई, आपने कैसे संभाला? I have heard that you had a big problem in your country. How did you handle it? So Bhutta Singh said, Shevardnadze said, Mr. Minister, tell me something. In your country, you have protests in which hundreds of thousands of people come. Maybe a million people come, maybe more. How come you are able to handle all of them? In my country, a few thousand came and my troops used poison gas and nerve gas. So Bhutta Singh said, मैं क्या excellency बुरा ना मानो, जे लोड होए तो मैं 2-4 battalion या 10-15 companies CRPF दे भेज देना. What he wanted to say was that a democracy knows how to deal with protests on the street. Because unlike the super armed KGB troops on tanks, CRPF is trained to be a riot police with lathis, shields, and also with very steely nerves in the face of a huge mob or a crowd of protesters. A dictatorial system does not know how to deal with protest on the street because it is not expecting protests on the street. And when protests on the street happen, then it uses the heaviest weapon available to it, which is something that also the Chinese had used with Tiananmen Square protesting students. Now, on that, there is a little side story. In 1990, in an interview with Playboy magazine, Playboy no less, Donald Trump had spoken approvingly of the Chinese methods. He said, and I quote from that interview, "The Chinese government almost blew it. Then they were vicious, they were horrible, but they put it down with strength. That shows the power of strength. Our country is right now perceived as weak." So this is Donald Trump in 1990. He's been asked this question several times after that on whether he meant to support the Chinese. He's always hedged his answer. So maybe he's living out a little fantasy in this case.